Really excited to see folks joining from various regions of Washington state. As you all know, it's a key in policy advocacy to have a wide representation. So this webinar is offered as part of our Food Week of Action, which is our annual initiative to highlight and uplift anti-hunger advocacy efforts, campaigns, and resources for food justice. And I will talk more about that later. We have a wonderful list of anti-hunger policy experts joining us today. Thank you, Claire Lane, Anti-Hunger and Nutrition Coalition Director, Kristen Ang, our Policy Engagement Director from Faith Action Network, and Trevor Sandison, our longtime volunteer lobbyist with Faith Action Network in Olympia. Um, Before jumping right in, I also like to give a couple of housekeeping notes. Please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking, as you all are doing just fine now. And for questions, if you come up with a question while the presenters are speaking, feel free to put them in the chat. I will make sure to monitor them and deliver them later to the presenters. But we'll also have a time in the middle and at the end for Q&A where you can use the raise hand feature on Zoom and speak up your questions or share your comments. And lastly, the webinar is recorded and will be sent out to those who registered. So that's all from me for now, and I will pass the mic to Elise.
Hello, thanks for taking time out of your evening and delaying dinner, eating an early dinner, whatever you needed to do to talk about food. We're just really glad you're here. I'm Elise Goyer, Executive Director of Faith Action Network. This is really the heart and soul of what we do. Hunger is often first, and then all the root causes, all the issues of poverty and climate and other interrelated issues. So it's really important to us. You'll hear more about that in a minute. But we do this Food Week of Action at this very busiest time of year with Presbyterian Hunger Program nationally with a special grant and with the support of the ELCA or Lutheran Advocacy Witness in Society National Office. And we're really lucky to have Tomo with us this year as a fellow, Hunger Advocacy Fellow with the ELCA Advocacy. We've got lots of staff on. We're really grateful for her staff that you'll hear from, Kristen and Trevor, and but also Elizabeth Dickinson, our partnership coordinator, Eric Don Anderson from Yakima, who also works at a food bank. And our board member, Jasmeet Singh. So really happy to have you with us. Also, our new social work intern, Sarah Starrett. So thank you, because what we do here will just keep amplifying through the year. This is a beginning, a glimpse that Claire Lane, food policy expert, has offered her time to be with us to share. So as we begin, I just want to note that we are on many different ancestral grounds of the 29 recognized tribes of the state of Washington, and also unrecognized tribes seeking recognition, like the Duwamish, which is where the land I'm sitting on. I also just want to take a minute to have a silent moment for peace. I think we've all just been pulled many directions by just the horror in our world and how it's impacting our communities within FAN, beyond FAN, and beyond our local area. So for those in Israel, for those in Gaza, for all peoples impacted, let's take a minute of silence. Thank you. And with them in mind in our hearts, we will talk about how to feed hungry people and people seeking supports of all kinds. I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Ang, our policy director, so that she can kick us off, and I'm going to share the screen. I hope everybody was okay with being recorded. We are being recorded.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Kristen Ng, a Faith Actions Network's Policy Director. And here we are. As some of you know, Faith Action Network, FAN for short, is a statewide multi-faith partnership striving for just, compassionate, and sustainable communities through courageous advocacy and public action. And one of the issues, a shared value among likely all faith communities, is alleviating hunger and the sharing of food. And here we are today. So that is one of the primary missions of FAN. We not only do food issues directly, like free school meals for kids, or having more dollar values to your SNAP or WIC, or protecting that. Our FAN legislative agenda is actually widespread. Everything from economic justice, whether that is the working families tax credit or extreme wealth tax, all the way down to climate change. And this is because we believe that these particular bills, everything is closely related. They're interrelated. The success of one part of our agenda is connected to the other. If you want solutions for food security, you'll want it also you'll need it in housing. That's how much related they are. I would say that for economic justice, I would say put the word out for the working families tax credit, because that provides financial support to low-income families, and they can decide to use that cash, which is $50 to $1,200 each year, for other food necessities or other things. We don't want to make people have to make choices, and that is tied to affordable housing. Should people have to choose between shelter and food? And we don't want people to have to do that. We don't want people to skip meals so that they can make rent. Or for climate change, we know that climate change and environmental justice is relevant to food security. There's going to be climate-related disruptions, migrations, and this can impact food production and availability, as well as water resources. That's why we do believe that we must advocate on all levels, on all these issues, to secure, to have food security and for the well-being of our community. And I will hand it off to, I believe, Claire. Start us off.
Thank you so much. I just want to start by saying Faith Action Network has been a hugely important partner for the Anti-Hunger and Nutrition Coalition since its earliest days, and certainly from my earliest days when I started working on hunger work. So I'm super appreciative for FAN and grateful to be here with you all. So tonight we're going to talk about sort of the three levels of policy that's on the move right now and sort of critical for the hunger safety net, as well as sort of that economic security and all of those other pieces that Kristen was just talking about. So we're going to start with the federal budget, then we're going to talk a little bit about the Farm Bill, and then we're going to talk about the state legislature. Sounds good? And as Tomo said, I really like interactive things, so put questions in the chat, raise your hand, don't worry about interrupting me. I really want this to be interactive. This is a small group, but enough to really have a robust conversation about these issues. So let's start with the budget. The folks at FAN will laugh, but I was really saying, like, we have to wait to finalize these slides because we don't know if we're going to have a speaker in the House to do anything. And lo and behold, we still don't have a House speaker as of today. We did get that continuing resolution. The federal budget ends, the federal fiscal year ends September 30th. Congress avoided a shutdown, which then created a crisis in the leadership among the House Republicans. But we were really preparing for a potential shutdown on the 30th, and it didn't happen. And we are super grateful. So Congress approved what they call a continuing resolution, which basically says we can't make an agreement on any policy changes in the budget. So we're just going to continue the budget we have now for some short period till we can come to an agreement about what we want to change. That continuing resolution lasts only until November 17th. And as I said, the House is even more of a mess now than it was on September 30th. So there are really grave concerns. everybody is expecting that there will be some kind of a shutdown on November 17th. It is very hard to imagine that the House would be able to pass a budget that would be passed by the Senate and signed by the president. It's also not at all clear the Senate did their job. Patty Murray is chair of the Budget Committee. They did pass all 13 appropriations bills in the Senate side with bipartisan votes. But it's not at all clear that that's a budget that the House would pass and that would go on to the president. So I was in a meeting with USDA today, and they are talking about what to expect if there's a shutdown. What we do know is SNAP benefits will not be interrupted in November because they will already gotten benefits. And I should have corrected this slide today. And I was assured today, USDA has assured us that benefits will be able to go out for folks on food stamps in December. If a shutdown lasts longer, then we get into troubled territory and we don't know what that looks like. WIC, the program that provides food for women, infants, and children. WIC has the authority to front end spending, meaning they're still spending money now to keep the doors open, but there's no new money right now. Even in that continuing resolution, WIC had been spending more than it was appropriated for. So it is going to be really critical in the final budget deal to add money to the WIC program just to serve the existing caseload. So that will be a strong call to action for Congress. Senator Murray is keenly aware of this. She's a huge advocate and supporter for WIC. But the House Appropriations Committee, they cut WIC in the bill they passed in their committee right before things all fell apart. In a shutdown, we know that non-essential federal workers must stay home and they'll have no pay. Essential workers, air traffic controllers, some active duty, military duty, they are considered essential workers. They have to come to work, but they will also be working with no pay. We know in the past, we have seen big demand at food banks, particularly down by the bases in Washington, because those families they're not getting paid, and it's really a challenge. So we know if there's a shutdown, there's both risks to benefits, and we also have a bunch of federal employees that won't be getting paid. Next slide. Here's what we do know, what has been at risk from the House. Like I said, the House did pass us their ag committee appropriations bill. It passed with time limits on people being qualified for SNAP, certain kinds of adults. Those time limits, it limited states' flexibility to waive those time limits for people. Washington's very forward thinking and forward acting and waives that requirement for as many people as possible. Because here's a fun fact, if you are what they call an ABOD, an able-bodied adult without dependents, you can qualify for SNAP for only 3 months every 3 years, unless you can verify that you work 20 hours a week every week. Fun facts. There's flexibility, and the House limited that flexibility, increased the threshold to be able to waive that requirement. They don't like people being on SNAP without also working half or full time. That bill also, that 14% cut to the Emergency Food Assistance Program and the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, both of those are programs that purchase big agricultural commodities from American farmers, and then they turn that food around and send it out to food banks. So some of that TFAP program provides money for that distribution, but it also is food directly to food banks. They approved a 14% cut. We are hearing from food bank partners that they are seeing more clients now in some places than they did at the peak of COVID. I know, the Yakima Rotary Food Banks here, I'm sure you could tell us the same stories. A cut to TFAP and CSFAP would be catastrophic in the coming year. That budget also cut the WIC fruit and vegetable voucher program so that children would qualify for $4 a month to purchase fruits and vegetables, and pregnant and postpartum and nursing moms would have, I think, $8 or $9 a month for fresh produce. Probably not the way we want to go for moms and babies. There were also other extreme cuts to low-income housing, the low-income heating, energy, and assistance program, K-12 education, and a whole lot more. So the need for a budget deal that gets us through this coming fiscal year is hugely important. There is a huge push in that final budget deal to also extend the child tax credit that was so critical and we know made such a difference for families, and particularly for food security for families with kids. All of those are important priorities as we urge Congress to pass a budget in a timely way and make sure that that timely budget doesn't cut programs that are serving the people most vulnerable. Questions on any of that? Kabo's put some links in the chat. There's a link, that second one she sent, the funding, the adequate funding for the WIC program. It would be great if you all click that link when you have a minute, sign on to that letter. It's a hugely important program, and the funding needs are really critical. Let's move on to the next one, because we're going to go from the budget to the Farm Bill. So as you may or may not know, the Farm Bill is this huge piece of legislation. It governs agricultural policy, farm subsidies, grants for, small scale producers. There's a whole section called the title, a whole section of the bill that's all of conservation. And then the nutrition title, that section of the Farm Bill covers TFAP, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, and the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, FDIPR, right? This is alphabet soup for y'all. That's the Food Distribution on Indian Reservations Program, and SNAP, food stamps. There are other programs in that title, but those are the really major ones. Food banks, food stamps. That's really what the Farm Bill nutrition title really focuses on. It's reauthorized every 5 years. And fun fact, that also expired on September 30th. That 5-year time limit was up. The Farm Bill expired. For the moment, they do not have a continuing resolution for the Farm Bill. The feeling was the Farm Bill could sort of exist as it needs to for this interim period till November 17th-ish. But it's going to have to get reauthorized. The best guess we had heard from Senate Agriculture staff, committee staff, a few weeks ago was they hope to have it done the first quarter of next year, of 2024. If that's the timeline, they will have to also soon do a continuing resolution of the Farm Bill, meaning they will take all the existing funding and programs and move it forward until they have a new Farm Bill. Unless they make huge cuts in the budget process before they get to the Farm Bill. Again, this pushing for a really strong, robust budget is critical. So in that Farm Bill, we are very hopeful they move on it. The Farm Bill is a hugely important piece of legislation for every state. There is something in the Farm Bill for every community. And as an anti-hunger advocate, there are people on staff in every single congressional district in America. And in Washington state, the highest percentage of SNAP participants are in Central Washington in Congressman Newhouse's district. So for those of you from Wenatchee, you have a really important, well, depending on where you are actually around the Wenatchee, you are either in Kim Schreier's district, who was on the Ag Committee for a long time and is the lead for the House Democrats on the Farm Bill, a coalition of House Democrats. She's the point person for the Farm Bill there. So she's a hugely important person to weigh in with. If you're on the other side, of Wenatchee and you are in Dan Newhouse's district, he's hugely important because he's on that Ag Appropriations Committee. And he has more constituents proportionately on SNAP than any other Congress member in our state. So this bill is important for everyone in our state and all our Congress members, but you have opportunities with each one to weigh in. For the nutrition title, you will get a really wordy slide in a second, and there's a link. Maybe Tomo, you can put the link to Northwest Harvest Farm Bill page. We work very closely with Northwest Harvest, which is why it's great to have Trevor here. Our priority bills for the nutrition title, all to one degree or another, they are bills that support expanded eligibility for programs, expanded access, or expanded benefit adequacy, or some combination of them all. We know that things like SNAP works. We know that food banks are an essential part of the hunger safety net. And we think it's critical that we make investments and policy changes, frankly, particularly based on what we learned during COVID, when there were a whole lot of sort of short-term crisis responses, right? Congress boost SNAP benefits way up. And it turns out that really worked. It really helped to keep food security much more stable. Now that that boost went away, we're really seeing those lines at the food banks. And yeah, right? Up to 1,000 people being served at the Yakima Rotary Food Bank. Those are not the normal numbers. Even 850 during the pandemic was not normal for your food bank. I know that. So more people are accessing the food bank, both because they learned about services from the pandemic, but also, right? Y'all have gone grocery shopping. Food inflation has been far outstripped. Food and gas inflation has been far faster than any increases than anything else. That's hit everybody, but it has hit low-income people particularly hard. SNAP just hasn't been able to keep up with the increase in food prices. And it's been a struggle for food banks. So the Farm Bill is going to be super important. Let's look at the next page. So all that tiny print, I do not expect you to read it. I don't expect you to do anything with it at the moment. But that link that Tomo put in, this is from our partners at Northwest Harvest. They have created an entire page in their website just about the Farm Bill that talks about each of those bills. The link is there, you can see on the left-hand side. The other thing that would be great, for a while, Northwest Harvest has been collecting SNAP stories. They have been encouraging food banks and WIC agencies and low-income housing providers and supportive housing service providers. We know those are the people who are using SNAP, and we really want our Congress members to hear from constituents, from people who are using SNAP, who have benefited from SNAP in the past, who are serving people who benefit from SNAP, hearing stories so that they can use those as they talk to their colleagues in Congress about why these SNAP bills in particular are so critical. So it's a form right there that just got put in the chat. For those of you who are service providers, it would be great to have you not only use that. We've had staff fill out stories to talk about why SNAP matters to what they do in their work, and then obviously sharing it with the people who are directly participating and SNAP clients. Questions from here, because I've just been talking a lot. Do you want to go to the next page, Tomo?
Well, you probably saw all those bills that Claire had and all these different links, and they're very important, this particular information. But the most important is actually your representatives hearing from you on the ground. I know, like, there's bills numbers, there's such a little bit of technical, but what they actually like to hear is stories. how does this affect the people in your community? How is it affecting you? What are you seeing at your food banks? The stories of kids in your school. That actually moves the needle at both the state and federal level. And so please do contact your legislators, contact your local elected officials, make sure that they are aware of what's going on in your community when it comes to food hunger and security issues. And either talk to them in person, it's better in person, give them a tour of what's going on, show them, demonstrate to them, have the stories, because it's actually stories that are more persuasive sometimes, not sometimes, but all the time than graphs. So it is your stories, and it is that people-to-people human touch that gets legislation passed. And you can talk to, it doesn't have to be the congressperson or the senator themselves. They actually have lots of staff. So make an appointment and you can talk to some of their staffers, or have a group of you, and I'm sure your senator or congressperson will meet. But either way, make contact and let it be known. Thank you.
Absolutely. I always say, legislators say they want lots of graphs and numbers, but really what they use and what sticks with them is those stories that really humanize the policy and the program you're talking about. So that's the big federal budget and farm bill. Questions from any of you? Because we're going to move on to state stuff, but I really do want to have a conversation before we totally change gears and talk about Olympia. What are your burning farm bill questions? What are the big questions you have about the federal budget?
Can you go back one screen, please? Thank you.
This is not my area, but I'm going to jump in for just a second and provide one of those stories. For those of you who are of advanced years like I am, you'll remember the names George McGovern and Bob Dole. The reason the Farm Bill exists the way it does, to bring in not just legislation for the farmers, but to bring in what we now call SNAP benefits and benefits for those who need it, is because two people, Midwest United States senators from opposite parties and opposite positions, came together to make it work. That's what we've lost lately in the House, and that's what we're trying to get back, and that's what we're hoping comes back to us.
I'll chime in a little bit. I had a chance 5 years ago for the Farm Bill to sit and visit with Dan Newhouse. And at that time, there were some really terrible proposals about changing SNAP, for example. Mm-hmm. And he assured me, I was with a couple of others, thanks to Faith Action Network, I was in this meeting, what was happening in the House would never pass the Senate. And he was taking comfort in the fact that, you know, the Senate was a voice of reason. And so that kind of pragmatism, I hope he continues to hold and orient toward as we negotiate. By the way, the Farm Bill, I don't think, when was the last time it actually was passed on time, Claire? It's notoriously overdue, right? So here we are.
And Dan used to be head of the WSDA,
mm-hmm.
so, back in his days.
Right. Congressman Newhouse was a state legislator and heard a lot about our state food stamp program for legally residing immigrants who are no longer covered under federal benefits. When he became the director of the Department of Agriculture, that was during the Great Recession. And that was when there was a big reorganization of some of the state agencies, when all of the food bank programs were consolidated in the Department of Agriculture. He was the director at the time. And so he really understood. He had to understand because he was overseeing it at this moment of big change. He really does get it. I will say,
and he's a grower as well.
He's a farmer. I will say he is absolutely a great voice of reason. And yet sometimes when you sit in a room with a whole lot of your colleagues and you just keep hearing the talking points over and over, every now and then we hear those coming out of his mouth. And we have to say, hey, do you know the vast majority of people on SNAP do work Or there are people we wouldn't expect to work, like children and seniors and people with disabilities. And that even those people that fall outside, that people who are working full-time or near full-time, oftentimes people on SNAP are there only for, 6 months. It's a program where the caseload matches almost entirely employment rates, except for now. This has been this huge anomaly, right? Because unemployment is really low, but costs are really high and people are really struggling to make ends meet. And so more and more we're seeing people coming to the food banks because they literally don't qualify for SNAP and they still can't afford to put food on the table. So this is why working together and saying, Feeding America will say that food banks, the emergency food system, provides 1 bag of groceries for every 9 bags of groceries that SNAP provides. It's an important part of the system, and yet it can't possibly make up when there are cuts to SNAP because it's already a system that's stretched to the max. So these bills, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer questions about particular bills, spend some time on Northwest Harvest page, but really those are bills about making SNAP benefits stronger, eliminating that time limit for people on SNAP based on their work hours. There's a bill in there that says college students shouldn't have to be enrolled at least half-time and working 20 hours a week to be able to eat. And there are bills in there that are maybe smaller bills, but they come from Washington members because they've really come from the experiences and the input from advocates like you all. So let's shift over to the other Washington where things are easier.
Sort of.
Easier. It's not easy.
Knock on wood. Oh my God.
So this upcoming legislative session that you all, because you're fan advocates, you probably know this. Last year it was a long session. That's where they do the 2-year budget. This year is a short session. It's 60 days. That includes weekends. So it moves quickly. And this is where legislators will say, this is where we want to, fix things that weren't done quite right last year, tweak some things, wrap up some things. And we're like, yeah, and we're going to do that boldly. They don't have to be little tweaks and fixes. For our coalition, the Anti-Hunger and Nutrition Coalition, which FAN is a part of, anti-hunger members, we lead on our anti-hunger agenda. We're the experts. We have organizations and partners who really deeply understand these programs, and we set our anti-hunger agenda. We also have an anti-poverty agenda. We know that it's one thing to feed people today and next week, but the answer really is about justice and equity and solving poverty for the future. So we know we can't end hunger if we don't take a huge dent in poverty. And those issues our partners lead. So you'll see a few issues that are just draft because those coalitions and partners haven't completely coalesced on what we're going to be doing. But we do have some pretty clear ideas on our anti-hunger agenda. So let's dig in. Trevor, want to talk about our favorite bill from last year?
Oh my gosh. So Claire and I were talking earlier today, and both of us decided that we needed to come up with a different word than incrementalism. So I deep dive into a thesaurus and found out there was no better word than incrementalism. We just keep moving forward. We chip away at every session. We get a little bit more and a little bit more every session. This has been going on for long before any of us were on the Hill, but especially in full force, I'd say, for the last 10 plus years, maybe longer. The big push for us a couple sessions ago, and I have now lost track of how many years that's been. I think it was 17 that we passed. No, 16. We passed breakfast after the bell. To allow schools to start offering breakfast as a grab and go as kids come in, because of course nobody's on time ever, even us. The big push though, and I'm going to jump forward to what we did last session, as Claire mentioned, we were pushing free meals for everybody, breakfast and lunch for every student there. It was not pushed back on for policy reasons by any stretch of imagination. Everybody embraced it until the dollars came out, and then it became, no, that's way too much. We can't afford that. And it was $200 million, give or take. And near the end of the session, or about a quarter of the way, halfway through the session, we realized we're going to have to start paring back. Our big champion in this case was Marcus Riccelli from the 3rd District out of Spokane. He's been the food champion with us for quite a few years now, and he's just been a wonderful legislator to work with. And we had a few late night meetings, and frustrated, and we pared it back to pick up grade schools is basically what ended up of elementary schools. And we pushed forward the implementation date, and the bill now that has in force, which is 1238, is $23.4 million. So now going into this session, what we're looking to do is we have two possible pathways. One is back to Representative Riccelli, but nothing's in writing yet, where he wants to go back and go school meals for all. The other is for with the Superintendent of Public Instruction, who wants to spend more money and put more kids on that to finish up. I think it was up to middle school, if I remember. Up to and except for high school. So money figures aren't out for that. The appropriations, the budget, excuse me, and my brain is not working. Hasn't been determined yet, but that's kind of the plan for next session. You'll notice on the screen, there are quite a few states that have gotten there before us. And we're hoping to, California, Colorado, Illinois, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New Mexico, and Vermont. We were kind of hoping to be sooner in that play to get all to school meals for all, but I think that's probably going to be 25 before that we see that. But it won't mean that we won't try.
Trevin.
Sorry, that a call came in there.
Thank you, Trevor. Yeah,
Yep.
I think we have a bold vision that we've held for a long time, that we should have free school meals for all kids. And during COVID, we had that experiment. Every state had that option. We saw how well it worked. And we've been pushing. We were making progress before that here in Washington, and we've been pushing ever since. So I like to say number 10 is really just one digit off from number 1.
Yeah.
So we're talking about free school meals for all this session and continuing last session's work. So it's just a fix, right? We're just going to tweak last year's bill and just cover all kids. Let's move on to the next slide. We want to finish the job of House Bill 1559 from last year. That was the hunger-free college bill that had all kinds of different components. But the most important thing in that bill for us was it included a provision that has been tested and tried in King County at all of the community colleges in King County, where they have created what they call a benefits hub on each campus, and a trained staff person who understands how to help navigate benefit eligibility, applications, enrollment, the whole process. And not just for food stamps, though we think that's a hugely important cornerstone of those benefits, but also Working Connections childcare, making sure those students know about the Working Families Tax Credit if they're eligible, really making sure that we're referring those low-income students to whatever resources are available for them. In the budgeting process last year, though, the bill said it should fund at least a 0.75 FTE navigator for each college. The budget actually only funded a 0.5 FTE. And this slide is a little wrong, which I found out at the end of the day today. They didn't just underfund it at the community and technical colleges. They underfunded it for all of the colleges, 4-year and 2-year. So we are working to make sure that this upcoming supplemental budget fixes that gap between the bill they passed and the budget they passed. We think there's enormous impact of this model, and we want to make sure that the budget reflects the impact intended in the bill.
One of the things about this particular bill is it was declared dead, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, something like that. And we still got it to the governor's desk.
Yes. Yes. Advocacy works.
Yes, it does.
The next slide. We want to talk about senior nutrition this session. This has actually long been, and I think Elise knows this, this has long been sort of a neglected part of the hunger safety net. This is things like Meals on Wheels, meal programs at senior centers. It's really been underfunded in our state budget. COVID, again, there was a big burst of money from USDA for all kinds of things. And suddenly senior centers and the local area agencies on aging were actually able to serve a whole lot more people because they had more funding. Those elders were hungry all along. Many of them weren't able to come to a food bank or wouldn't choose to go to a food bank because there was just the dignity of not wanting to ask for that kind of help. Whereas things like Meals on Wheels and meals at senior centers, that's there for them. And they understood that. So we are going to be working with the State Association of Local Area Agencies on Aging and the AARP to be asking for just over $15 million. New data just came out that showed the increase in the percentage of low-income seniors in our state's population. Y'all, the line was like this in the last several years. We know everyone's heard about the silver tsunami. We know this is an area of need and it will be an area of need ongoing. And we're really talking about this $15 million as a down payment on what we know we need to be investing in the future for the needs of the future. Next slide. I'm going to add one last thing that's not on the slide because we're still sorting this out. But from the very beginning of COVID all the way through last year, through a couple different vehicles, food banks have gotten a ton of funding. Everybody saw the news in March and April of 2020, those lines of cars. We saw the incredibly creative ways that food banks were serving their clients in a low contact and no contact way. They have been doing heroic work, literally nonstop since March of 2020. And yet, as you've heard, demand has not gone down, but the availability of food and the affordability of food for food banks has never been so stretched. So while we have been told last session, y'all got enough money, we've spent a lot of money on this, we need to invest in other areas, I really do think we're going to be coming back and asking for more money for food banks. For the wonks here, or the food bank directors, what that translates to is money for the emergency assistance, emergency food assistance program. It's late. That's money that is the traditional way our Department of Ag has funded and supported food banks. That money goes out to local lead agencies in a community. That money is flexible. They can spend money based on what they need in their community. And we really think that is the right answer right now. So we're testing that idea, checking in with folks. Folks have questions about that, happy to answer that. There is a hand raised.
Yeah, I had a question about the Meals on Wheels you mentioned. Is that a federal program or a state program or both?
There is federal funding for Meals on Wheels.
Oh, there is.
Believe the House budget cut some of that, the proposed budget. So I don't want anybody to think that budget is actually going to go anywhere. But there is also state money in that.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
And that money would include both Meals on Wheels and funding for those senior meal programs at like senior centers. Mm. So I'm going to be quicker on this. This is our anti-poverty priorities. TANF, the temporary aid for needy families, that is for families with children who are living in deep poverty. And when I say deep poverty, I think the income, and Kristen, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, the income qualification for TANF is somewhere around like 35% below the poverty level. So we're talking about families in deep, deep poverty. We, in the Great Recession, we didn't just cut the budget for TANF. Unfortunately, the legislature changed the laws around TANF. And we have been fighting ever since 2010, 2011 to overturn those policies and go back to the way our TANF program used to be, where it was less punitive, more flexible, and really there as a resource for those kids and parents and families, kids in deep poverty. So we're going to be going back. We were actually now partnering with DSHS, who manages that program. They are also trying to change those laws and making that a priority as an agency with the governor. On October 26th, if you want to really nerd out about housing, there's going to be in the House Housing Committee in Olympia, they're doing what they call a work session that is really about housing stability for tenants. That's about adequate notice for rent increases, rent stabilization, not rent control, but stabilization. We are partnering with the Low Income Housing Alliance on that work, as they are the experts sort of negotiating the nitty gritty of those bills. But we are really hopeful that there is more protections for tenants in this coming session. We'll be talking about child support for TANF families. Did you know the state keeps half of the child support that a parent gets if they're on TANF to pay for the TANF services they get? We're pushing to make sure that if you're a parent and you are owed child support by your kid's other parent, you should get to keep that if you are living that deeply below the poverty line. We have been talking about a guaranteed basic income pilot. There's been a bill, different bills over the last couple of years. We're still working on that. There are other issues that we are still sort of deciding what our shared agenda is. And as always, our coalition has always pushed for tax reform to support a healthy, thriving, hunger-free Washington. We have enough money and we have enough food in the state to feed everybody. We just need the political will and the money to do it. Kristen?
Okay, well, I guess this is where I say that everyone, please join us for the 2024 legislative session. There'll be summits all around the state that you can join to talk legislative policy and advocacy with people in your area. I would say sign up for our alerts and share it with your networks. We do have a Faith Action newsletter. You can also make phone calls, send emails, write opinion pieces in your local newspaper with regards to some of these hunger issues, particularly the free school meals for all kids and some of the issues that Claire had just had in the previous slide. We do have lobby days in Olympia, which you can participate in person. For us, it's in person. I'm not sure about Hunger Action Day, which is Thursday, February 1st. Interfaith Action Day on February 8th is in person, and we set up the appointments with your legislators to meet. But you can meet with your legislator right now and during session if you wanted to do it on your own. You can simply also email their staff or themselves, and they can sometimes schedule a meeting with your group or with you. You could also call their office to let them know your concerns. The people take down the notes. We also send out a weekly alert in which we inform you where you can say, yes, you're pro for this bill, or no, or whatnot, and you'll have a chance. It just takes a minute to sign up to do so. You can also testify online. You don't even need to drive to Olympia anymore and wait. A lot of people simply are doing it through Zoom. So you can sign up to testify in support of these bills. That's also helpful to see who is supporting and the number of people, because they do count that for the record. All the people who said yes, all the people who signed up for testimony to say yes. So that is counted. I would also, let's see here, needs glasses. I would also say that I would really actually encourage the online one because it is so convenient. A lot of groups are using that. And you can always make a meeting through the Zoom. You don't even have to meet with your legislator in person, although I highly recommend the in-person, but out of convenience, you can do it through Zoom.
All right, so Food Week of Action, as I mentioned earlier, this is annual week of celebration in honor of the community work towards food justice. And the link that I have on the screen, which I will share in the chat, this is a special resource for you to use for your advocacy effort. Although this is the Food Week of Action, of course, the issue concerns us all year long, as all the speakers have been mentioning. So this resource can be used beyond this week, but the document, if I hope you have an access to that link, if you could open and now, if not later, the document has information on the Farm Bill, the WIC that Claire touched on, Working Families Tax Credit, which could be crucial to helping low-income families with their food and children's child rearing support. And there's also food justice campaigns information, for example, supporting mushroom workers in the Yakima Valley, workers of the windmill farms that have been enduring in unjust working conditions. There is a there's a campaign that's organized by United Farm Workers that you can support and sign a pledge. There's also a food justice campaign to demand Kroger join Fair Food program. So all these informations are under this document. You can print them out, share in your communities, maybe use, pick one or two action items from the document and use it in your gatherings of studies, your friends hangout, or even in your time of worship. So I hope this would be useful for you, and it would be especially for those who are interested in participating in lobby days in February. All the things on the document will still be relevant to what you'll be doing in February. So that's the information for you. There's also a list of documentaries and events that you could participate or have as a learning opportunity. For example, there's a documentary on hunger communities in Bryn and Othero in Washington that has been receiving support from Northwest Harvest nutrition programs, especially for children during the summertime when they're out of school. The food banks have been really instrumental to those communities. So look through and shoot me an email. I'll put my email address in the chat if you have any question on how you could utilize the resource. And I believe the next slide is the contact information of Claire and Kristen also. Okay, I hope you guys took the note of those contact information of our experts. And thank you so much, Claire, Kristen, Trevor, for sharing your knowledge and expertise. And I hope that this was helpful for you all already working hard advocates to equip and strengthen what you're already doing with policy advocacy. And we still have a few more minutes. If anybody wants to ask any question or share comments or story that we can listen in, please feel free, feel encouraged to do so.
Come on, y'all. You have to have some questions. We're talking about state government, Congress, the budget.
I've heard that there's food that's not getting distributed because of a lack of volunteers. Has that been addressed in the campaigning?
I'm glad you brought that up. I don't know that I would say that food's not getting distributed because there's a lack of volunteers. It is just putting enormous pressure on those food banks and food pantries to just keep working extraordinarily hard, right? There is actually a campaign, a PR campaign happening right now, and I wish I had the link. The Washington Food Coalition, which is another one of our key partners, that is the association of all the local food banks and food pantries. they have been partnering with a couple of organizations and a big PR push to have a big public awareness campaign about the need for volunteers. As you guys know, food banks are they're hugely dependent on volunteers. And in many cases, they are entirely run by volunteers. And that, when COVID hit, those volunteers largely stayed home. A lot of those volunteers are older, they had health risks, and they just haven't come back. And it has been a huge struggle for food banks, on top of the high prices for food and for gas, to also be having to pay more staff hours and really have that crunch where volunteers really needed to fill in. So thank you. There is a huge need for volunteers. And if folks have questions, you've got my email. I am happy to answer questions and point you in the right direction. Apparently the Seahawks are one of those partners. So there was a day a few weeks ago where Seahawks fanned out across the state and were volunteering at food banks, and they were being filmed by King 5 and some others. And it was a big statewide push.
I would just like to say thank you to all the people who represent, some faraway places in our state that we don't always come together. So Wenatchee, thank you for showing up, Yakima, thank you for showing up, and everywhere in between, and Puget Sound area. This is a statewide issue. It has statewide solutions. And we as faith community spend a lot of time making sure our neighbor is fed, and we've been doing that for centuries. When we change the policies, we feed 100,000. So I just am a true believer that we bring our neighborly outreach to our public policy change. So thank you for being here. And I just really want to say thanks to Claire for being the hunger expert, fixing hunger expert that she is. I've learned just about everything I know from Claire and her predecessors. So thank you. If you have any questions, you've got contact info. You can always email any of them or the fan office. Tomo's going to be really digging in on these issues this year too. So she put her email address in the chat. Any other last words? Thank you.
Well, I'm a big fan of FAN, so thank you for inviting me.